Hello, welcome everyone. Come on in. You're here with the Northeast and Caribbean Prevention Technology Transfer Center.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, on strategic planning. This is the second in our series on sharpening your prevention skills. So as with last week, what we're hoping is that this is a kind of an interactive session. Some of you, when you did registration, you sent us some questions that we'll be looking at today on the session. For others, if questions come up, please put them in the chat. We will be looking at them throughout. We'll monitor the chat. We'll bring them into the conversation. We really want this to be a session that you are able to take away practical tips and answers to the work that you are trying to do in the real world, right? That's important. Getting the work done well, with a good process, in a way that brings better outcomes for all of you. So this is our lobby poll. When was the last time you engaged in the planning process? And could you use a couple of words to describe your experience? So if you all would think about that, and any of you brave souls who would put it into the chat, we'll talk about it a little bit. We have a few more people coming into the room now, so I just want to give them another minute to get settled, and we will take a look. So our lobby question to think about and get you in the mode is, when was the last time you engaged in a planning process? And could you use a couple of words to describe your experience, any kind of a planning process? It doesn't have to be one related to prevention. It doesn't have to be one that is related to that's related to your workplace or prevention. And I also want to say happy St. Patrick's Day right back to you. Thank you very much, because I'll tell you, it's a good day, right? So let's see. So, planning. We did planning for this particular session. We engaged in a strategic planning process for this particular session. And we brought our people together. We made an agenda, we made a time frame, we brought our data together, and hopefully our strategic plan for this particular session will show that we have a good strategic plan process, because it'll be a good experience for all of you. So let's see. Very good. Oh, thanks, Jenny. Approximately 5 years ago, with our board of directors, we did a strategic planning process at our agency. It was exciting, and we had a plan. That's wonderful. That's a very, that's a big lift, is what I would describe that as. And it will be interesting to see if some of these components that we put forward here were part of that, and what your thoughts are, Jenny, regarding that. All right, we're going to get started. For purposes of time. Thank you all for participating. And that's it for now. Again, please use the chat. We will absolutely be there responding. So welcome again. This is Sharpening Your Prevention Tools, Strategic Planning with the Northeast and Caribbean Prevention Technology Transfer Center. This is the second in a series of 3. My name is Claire Neary. I'm the project coordinator for the Northeast and Caribbean Prevention Technology Transfer Center, and I'll just be doing some introductory work right now. And if I could have the next slide, please. This is our technical slide, and there's a lot of information on it. So you'll be getting a copy of this slide deck after the session, and you can read this more fully. I'm going to point out a couple of highlights, which is that we are recording the webinar, and that following the event, we will share the recording with all of you, and we'll also be posting it on our website. We'll be providing certificates of attendance to those who attend in full. That usually takes about a week for us to get those out. And I also want to acknowledge our funders, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. All of our services in the PTTC network as a whole come to you free of charge because of the generosity of SAMHSA. And I'd like to point that out at this time. And with the next slide, I'm going to show you a piece of related information. This is our evaluation slide. You can use the URL or you can use the QR code. You'll see it again at the end of the session. And this is one of the ways that we provide feedback to the funder, to SAMHSA. And so we ask you to take just a few minutes. It takes about 5 to 8 minutes to go ahead and please take this survey at the end of the session, because first of all feedback is good feedback, and we do read all the feedback and we incorporate it to every extent that we can into our going forward efforts. And then also just the fact that you take it, let Samson know that we have participation from our group, that we are doing what they're asking us to do with their very generous funding. So thanks for that. And our next slide. This is a slide that we start all of our sessions with, really throughout the PTTC network, but particularly with our PTTC, the Northeastern Caribbean. And I'm just going to read it and get us started in terms of how we want to center ourselves for today's event. We believe that language matters and words have power. And so the PTTC network uses affirming language to promote the application of evidence-based and culturally informed practices. And we certainly have endeavored for this particular session to be a reflection of that. And the next slide. This is an overview of the PTTC network. There's also an MH, Mental Health, PTTC network, and an ATTC network, an Addiction Technology Transfer Center network that has a similar composition. For the PTTC network, there are 10 regional centers which align with the HHS regions. So we, the Northeastern Caribbean PTTC, are located at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And we align with Region 2, which is New York, New Jersey, the United States Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. So we service, our mission is to service the communities and the workforce people of those places. Of course, we service everyone, and I can see by the registration list that people are here from all over, and we're really glad that you are here with us today. In addition to these regional centers, we also have 2 population-focused centers within this network. One is the National Hispanic and Latino PTTC, and the other is the National American Indian and Alaska Native PTTC. And please go to our website or the PTTC website for more information if you would like it. I'm going to give you a little bit of information on our facilitators and our trainers for today. Jess Goldberg is a training and technical assistance specialist with Education Development Center. She has over a decade of experience. She's specialized in building capacity to improve behavioral health at the national, state, regional, and local levels. And her areas of expertise include preventing youth substance use, promoting cross-sector collaboration, addressing health disparities, strategic planning, logic model development, and much more. And also with us here today, we have Carol Oliver, who has over 25 years of experience in substance abuse prevention and in the provision of training and technical assistance at the state, the national, and the community level. She's an expert in the implementation of SAMHSA's strategic prevention framework, and she has provided technical assistance for numerous states and communities on its implementation. So she's really a wonderful, wonderful resource for us today that we are so pleased that we are able to have her here. In the background, I want to say thank you to Claire McCurdy-Curlis, also with Education Development Center, who is helping us with our technical platform today. And I'm just going to look a little bit at what you'll be talking about today. So first, there'll be some defining of the language. That's a good place to start. What are we talking about when we say strategic planning? When would you use strategic planning? What are the opportunities? What are the good times? Some strategic planning tips and tricks, and an interview with an expert. And then next steps. So thank you very much again for being with us. We'll be looking at the chat regularly, and we hope for this to be a very interactive session to bring you the best that we can. Thanks very much. And I believe I'm handing to Jessica.
I think so. Thanks so much, Claire. And hi, everyone. It's so nice to see those of you who joined us last time, and welcome to anyone who's joining us here today for the first time for this series. We're really excited to continue our conversation about prevention tools and broaden out now to talk about strategic planning. And just to do a little level setting, today we're talking about planning in very concrete terms, right? So this act of actually creating a plan. And I want to first just juxtapose this against sort of these larger public health planning models or processes that we often use in prevention, like the Strategic Prevention Framework or SPIF that many of us work with and work within, which are those sort of meta processes that all of our other work exists within. And so taking the SPIF as the example, we're going to be talking today about the actual work of developing a concrete plan as we move through our SPIF process. And that plan is going to be a strategic document that we can pick up or open on our devices that's going to help us to know, what we're doing over a particular length of time and why and how. And again, not this sort of broader overarching process that holds all our efforts. And so on the next slide, we're gonna start by thinking about planning a bit broadly. And I think what struck me when we were thinking about today's session is that we're all always planning all of the time. And I think often without even realizing it in our personal lives and our households, looking at our work calendars and triaging requests that are coming in to our inboxes with our meeting schedules, right? So planning can be so unconscious that we're doing it without being aware, almost like, the actions that we take when we're driving our car without realizing, checking our mirrors and or covering our brakes when the car in front of us, taps theirs. And so there's many different types of planning, as you can see, and we're going to open up, I think, a poll for you to tell us what types of planning you've been involved in recently. And so I think we're going to launch that poll and just let us know, what types of planning you have been involved with. And I think you'll be able to select the different ones that you see here on the screen.
The poll is open, Jess, just so you're aware of it. And I see folks adding in their responses.
Very nice.
In a moment.
Okay, great. And as you're, and if you're not able to use the poll, Richard, thanks for setting the example of feeling free to pop your ideas into the chat. We would love to see the chat flying with other ideas that you see, especially if you're choosing that other write in chat option. So maybe you've had an event coming up, recently you've been involved in planning, or you've done some project-based planning, financial planning in your own personal life. You've moved or traveled or done some logistics planning recently. And if you're wondering what logistics planning is, it's about the way we might strategize to deliver the right products or services to the right customers or audiences at the right time and at the lowest possible costs. I had to Google that, so I'm very proud of myself now that I know what that means. And then that other choice, you can feel free, and I see a few folks are using the chat to let us know. Appreciate that. And I see, work-related events, financial events, company-wide strategic planning processes, more directive planning. And then we see you, Maria, having a little bit of trouble, but feel free to use the chat, and thanks for that. So you've done some event and project and travel and moving planning recently. So thanks for that. And Claire, if you feel like the group has had ample time to respond, if you want to share the answers, that'd be awesome. Okay, so you can see what we have here. Claire, do you mind debriefing them for us? I don't know why, but I don't see the responses popping up on my screen.
So we have a lot of people replying. Event, 83% event.
Nice.
Project, 76%. Next, we have travel or vacation. Yay. We have after that, financial, 55%, moving, 52%, and logistical, 38%. Let me just scroll down. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what we have. Oh, and was there a second question? No, there wasn't a second question, right? No. Okay.
No, I think this is great. And then probably some folks may have selected others and maybe or just written their other suggestions in the chat, which we see, which is great. Thanks so much for that. And there's a lot of planning going on in this group, which is great. We have the right folks on the line, and you've come to the right place for today's conversation. So thanks so much for sharing. So we can head to the next slide. Thanks, Clara. So, even though we just talked about different types of planning that we can take part in, there are certainly some common elements across planning, right? So any planning process is really going to involve a set of steps. And the first step that we're going to offer up here is to collect information that's needed to guide the planning effort itself. So, this information might be about what is currently happening with regard to the issue that you're planning around, how effective current efforts have been, the people that might be involved or impacted by that issue. It might relate to, different needs or wants that exist vis-a-vis the issue, or it might be on the topic of available resources or resource gaps that could exist, right? So you're collecting this information at the outset of the process. And once you have the information you need, you start to figure out what to do with it. And based on that information, you're going to see these various directions or avenues that you could take begin to unfold before you. And that, that would move, each would move your work forward, maybe to greater or lesser extents in different ways. And so from there, you're going to need to figure out a criteria by which to prioritize which of those options to focus on, right? And so prioritizing is really just about that process of deciding which actions are going to have the most significant impact on your work. And the criteria you use is really, coming up with the standards by which you can judge those options against. And there's lots of different criteria out there, certainly, that we can come up with, how it might be important. So how much will doing one of these options over another impact our issue? What's the most feasible option or options for us to do? What aligns most with our mission? What course of action that might have the most political will behind it, or the most support for our partners, or we can look at evidence of effectiveness as criteria, and so on and so forth. Just throwing out a few examples of criteria. And I know that Carol will be talking more about how we go ahead and go about identifying the right criteria to fit our needs. And then we take our prioritized options and we develop our action plan around them, including, who's going to do what, by when, and how we'll know that we're successful, right? And so that's kind of it. That's all. Those are the basic components of a general approach to planning. And on the next slide, I'll just reiterate that, we are doing this all the time. And so I think what we want to try to do right now is invite anyone on the line who might be willing to share an example of something they planned. Now, you just weighed in on the different types of planning you've been involved in, but now we're hoping someone might be willing to share something specific that you've been involved in planning. And it could be anything, right? In your prevention work, in your personal life. And then we're going to walk through these steps to create a real-time case example of planning and action. So I'll just pause. I'll look to the chat, but if you're feeling particularly willing and chatty, feel free to unmute and also speak out loud if you have an example that you'd be willing to walk through with us here. It'll be kind of fun, I think, to see this in practice. So any example of planning that you'd be willing to kind of offer up for our case example. I know people were kind enough already to put some ideas in the chat about their other types of planning. So maybe if you've already kind of offered up an example and you wouldn't mind workshopping it with us, that would be great.
And also another example would be like one that really did not go well. That actually can be a really good, with lesson.
Mm-hmm. I like it. Carol, did you want to add something?
Oh, well, I was going to say, as people are talking about it, I'm happy to share a funny one with you.
Okay.
More lighthearted. So I, with a friend who has a, one of these converted vans that, you see all these van videos and people convert their vans and they're very fancy. We were going to test it out to see what it was like. So we had to collect information on where should we go, who accepts these, how does it work, where can we go for free, when do you have to pay? So we had to collect a bunch of information. We had to figure out all our options from like which particular state do we want to go to, how far do we want to go to, and then a lot of our criteria was around like, what do we want the experience to be? Do we want it to be complicated? Do we want it to be really easy? Do we want it to be really safe? Do we want to make sure that feasibly this will work really, really well? because it was the first time out with this particular vehicle. And then based on that, we figured out what we were going to do. So that's kind of a, lighthearted weekend away example.
I love that one. I see a lot of van life videos coming up on my my YouTube feed, so I'll have to check these out. I think I haven't paid close enough attention to them yet.
Oh, definitely check them out.
Well, that is great. Thank you for that. And it's totally fine if there's no takers, because there's actually another example I think we can walk through quickly. I might put my colleague. Oh, Erica, I see you raised your hand. Would you be willing to share an example?
Sure. So currently we're in the process of, we're doing some workshops online via Zoom. So it's called Navigating Prevention Like a Boss, and I'll use this opportunity to promote it. So everyone's more than welcome to join us. But we're doing Navigating Prevention Like a Boss. So that's what we're planning, and we're partnering with different agencies. So we're doing like, we're focusing on all the drugs on our contract, and we even added tobacco. So we'll have like a marijuana 101 with Ram, who's going to be the speaker. We're going to have MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, to talk about alcohol 101. Then we'll have methamphetamines with Copom. And then we'll also have opioids and fentanyl 101 with the DEA, Gil Parker. So we're in the process of planning that. So yeah.
That's great. That's a perfect example. Do you mind if I walk through just like a few quick questions around your planning process?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So we have our planning topic, this workshop series, whose name we love, by the way. Fantastic name. So as you were beginning to plan the series, can you tell us just like a little bit about the types of information that you looked at or collected to inform your planning?
So we basically looked at the need of the community, and in conversation with TUSD, Torrance Unified School District, and some of the concerns the staff members had, we, kind of sat down and do some programming around their concerns with their students, and then with the staff just wanting to know more information about specific drugs. So yeah, we had to look at like the community's needs.
Yeah.
First, to talk about it first, and then go from there.
And it sounds like, you did that, beautifully, actually going to, the groups that you're interested in engaging and hearing directly from them kind of what those needs were. So as you were receiving and reviewing this information that you collected, were there other options as far as how to address it that rose to the top? Or did you know from the very beginning you were going to plan a training series, or was it a little bit more of an open-ended, let's figure out what the needs are, and then we'll figure out how to best address them?
Well, we kind of already knew the needs of the community, but in terms of, just to be honest, our contract, we have to cover these drugs on our contract. So we were just trying to figure out a way we can incorporate it, do it all under one umbrella, like one big series. I don't know if that answered your question.
I think it definitely did. No, that's very helpful. So you kind of knew what the mandate was and in the general direction you were going to take, the actions that you were going to take. And so did you use any type of criteria as you were planning this series, right? Like, you had to hone in eventually on kind of what specific topics or content you were going to cover. I'm just curious about how you selected between, this huge topic of prevention and navigating it like a boss. How did you come to determine what it was going to be, what was going to be actually included in the trainings?
Because, well, ask the question again. I'm sorry.
Sure. No, I'm sorry. I need to ask it better. Let me think. Just curious how you honed in on the specific information that you were going to share in your training. Yeah, like, well, how did you make decisions between what to include or not?
Okay, so we basically wanted them to talk about, like, give like the basic information on the specific drug, how it affects the brain, the body, how they can help, healthy alternatives to it, if that answers your question. So we kind of like gave them the baseline that this is what, the presenters, and they're pretty educated around the topics. So it's not like, something we had to like process with them. It was like, hey, we need this workshop to happen. Are you all available? This is, what we want to cover. Um,
Mhm.
and
So,
basi-
sorry, go ahead.
no, basically that was it. If that
Yeah,
answers
so
your question.
yeah, I think it does. Like, based on the needs you had heard, you knew kind of already the process you were going to use to address them, and then worked with your team, your presenters, to hone in on kind of those topics that arose as needs, but also, would kind of move the needle the most in terms of helping the audience become more like prevention bosses, right? It sounds like there were all sorts of things that could be covered, but based in need and based in sort of the goal of the series, what it sounds like you're hoping to accomplish, you're able to hone in more on that specific information that needed to be included. And so then I guess the question I have for you is how would you have, or how did you come up with like the action steps for moving it forward? You were able to hone in on what it was you were hoping to do. So how did you determine who was going to do what, and when they were going to get done, and all that kind of implementation related stuff? Like, what was that process like for you and your team?
So my team consists of 2 of us. So I basically delegated. Right. So it started with 1, so I'm appreciative to have 1 more person with me. So
Nice, nice. Well, that's good. So you divided it up, I think it sounds like, based on your bandwidth and the amount of time you each have working on this particular initiative. Is that fair?
right, yes. And in the same process, training the new staff too. So we basically divided it up. I'm like, okay, well, you work on a flyer. So she created the flyer. I did the Zoom registration link, added that to the flyer. Just as of yesterday, she was delegated with the task to reach out to the presenters, to meet with them one-on-one, for us to meet with them one-on-one, just to talk about any support they might need from us for the presentations, to review their presentations if they're put together already. So she was delegated with that task, and I'm basically at this point monitoring the registration when people register. And then right now it's just us planning, getting together with the presenters, making sure they're good to go, coming up with the program, what the actual program will look like. I'm responsible for creating like the whole slides, and I'm probably like all over the place with it, but I'm creating whole slides. So, I'll be, the opening, like, welcoming everyone. And then I'll do like a introduction of the speaker, and then I'll, do a warm handover for them to get into the presentation. Then we'll have a closing where I'll be responsible to, remind everyone of the upcoming workshop that's next. And yeah, right now we're just waiting for people to register. And then hopefully we're good to go. And then just, sending out reminder emails to remind people like, hey, we have this other workshop coming up too.
That's great. I feel like, Erica, you've just read your action plan out loud to us, and it looks a lot like the action plans that I have in my work as someone who does, training design and delivery as well. And so I think it's a really great example of planning and action, and certainly action planning and what it looks like to think through all of the concrete steps that support our work after our planning process is complete. So I just want to say I very much appreciate you being, willing and brave enough to unmute and give a plug for this very cool project that you're leading, and glad to hear about it here. So thank you for that. And now, just as a final thought before I turn it over to you, Carol, these general steps in planning apply across, all different types of planning processes, including strategic planning. And that is what Carol is going to get us into much more deeply, I think, next. But one more slide from me, and that is just a definition of strategic planning as a process in which an organization defines their vision for the future, their goals and objectives, and then establishes a sequence, or the sequence in which it's going to pursue those goals in order to reach its vision. So I just want to offer up and ask you in the chat, or if you want to speak out loud, if there's anything you like about this definition, or anything that you think is missing. I'll give you a chance to take a look at it on the slide. So again, it's this process by which an organization's leaders define their vision for the future, identify their organization's goals and objectives, and then establish the sequence in which those goals should be realized so that the organization can reach its stated vision. So anything you like about it, or anything that you'd change or that you think is missing on that definition on the slide? Just curious if anyone has an immediate response to it. I did, but I'm not going to tell you what it is because I know maybe some of you might be busy thinking or typing. So anything jumping out? Thanks so much, Carol, for starting us off. You'd add the organizational structure to get you there. Sure. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
I think of it as the car, right? So your vision is sort of where you want to go, and your mission is getting you there, and you're starting somewhere, but you need a vehicle. And the vehicle has to match where you're going to go and what you have and all of those things. So I think the vehicle that you're getting there in is important. So that's what I would say.
I love that. No, I think you're 100% right. I love that addition. Claire, you're noting it seems not to include some smaller efforts below the organizational level. Absolutely right. It's very, focused on the organization. And then Pamela, you're offering to specifically assign tasks and define those follow-up and next steps. Yeah, I think absolutely. It doesn't really talk about, the nitty-gritty of getting to those goals and vision, but kind of just assumes that there's a sequence of events that are going to lead to those goals and visions, but we don't just magically get there, right? I think for myself, I take exception a little bit to the idea that it should just be an organization's leadership involved in the decision-making process. I think, Carol, you'll probably have more to say on that, but just to say here that that I see it much more as a broader collaborative process when done right and done well. So my final comments on this will just be that, after we conclude a strategic planning process, we're going to have a strategic plan, right? That's going to be our product, one that's not static. It can be updated and revised to reflect changing conditions or our different new strategic directions that might emerge. But that's what we're hoping to walk you through here today. Now, this process of getting to that living document. So I think that's enough level setting from me. And so I'm going to turn the time over to you, Carol, to dive into what strategic planning is all about.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, everybody. So one of the things I wanted to start with is just putting this in the context of substance misuse prevention. And so we can go to the next slide. So, for me, the question is, so why do we do strategic planning? Why do we do this in substance misuse prevention? And it reminds me years ago, I was overseeing a couple of programs, and one was a coalition, and I had a lovely staff person who was working really hard, but we were going to go into engaging in strategic planning. And one of the things she said to me was, why? Like, we have like a work plan. Why do we have to have all these people have a say in what we're doing and how we're doing it? That just seems like it's going to complicate things. And I realized, I needed to provide more of a context for why this in the field that we're in. So one of the things, and this is something I learned really early on, it always stays with me, this idea that comprehensive prevention, if I'm going to really impact the situation in an individual community, let's say, then I have to involve multiple strategies across multiple systems, across multiple population. That requires a lot of coordination, a lot of organization, and a lot of buy-in from a lot of people. And this is not about one organization doing a program, which is great, and they may impact the 30 young people they're working with, or a school may influence the 9th graders. But if I really want to impact the problem of substance misuse, I have to work across different levels, right? I've got to work across the individual and the family and the community. And I've got to work across, young people, but then young adults, and I have to involve older people. And so in order to make that happen, you have to have a planning process. And having a strategic planning process, the other essential feature of prevention is really, it's about relationships and about relationship building, and also about the community owning the problem. And one of the things that strategic planning does, it's the best way of getting people to build relationships because they're collectively looking at and solving a problem together. I find I can do lots of exercises with teams and groups, and I've done that. But when I engage in strategic planning with them, they really bond themselves to each other, as well as really being connected to the topic. And so the second one is you involve many sectors, right? You can't just do it with one. And in order to sort of find out what are the resources in the different sectors and what is their interest, you need a planning process to do that. And then the other part is, in order, effective teams require a vision. And I think in substance misuse prevention, you need to have a vision. What are we hoping this community is going to look like in 5 years? Prevention takes a long time, right? Substance abuse prevention to make change can take 5 years, 6 years, 7 years to see the change. And so I need to make sure that people are knowing, what is this going to look like, in order to keep them motivated so that we're all moving in the same direction. And strategic planning is a way of also helping people to focus on a vision. So I really think that strategic planning is really essential for effective prevention to really, really work. So that's one point I wanted to make. And then we're going to go to the next slide. So when to engage in strategic planning, and this I find really interesting. So part of my background is I worked with many coalitions that were doing substance misuse prevention over the years, and I was able to help facilitate their processes or provide them guidance on strategic planning. And I was brought in at all different kinds of times, right? And some of these will look familiar to you. One is, I'm initiating a new planning table. So, a planning table is what I would call, you could call it a coalition. Sometimes somebody may say it's a collaborative, but it is a table where multiple sectors are coming together to solve a problem, to initiate something. And sometimes there's a new grant and money comes in and people want to initiate it, or there's a sector of the community. I've seen this. The police chief is looking at the situation saying, I want to do something about this. I want to call a meeting of a couple of other stakeholders. We want to do more about this. And they start initiating a planning. So one time it's one example of is when you're initiating. The other thing is, I also find for coalitions and organizations that are that table where all the people are organizing and planning and talking about substance misuse prevention, that it's really helpful to have an annual checkup, right? It's the coalitions I've seen that are really successful do strategic planning checkup. You relook at your goals and, what did my goals look like against my strategies? And did we have too many goals? Did we have too few goals? What was the effectiveness? How did our coalition work? Did we have enough leadership? How was our communication? So you can bring in strategic planning and this idea when you want to give a coalition an annual, what I would call a checkup. And what's good about that, just like a checkup, you will be able to catch problems that are starting to develop. Another one is when you're having problems in an organization. So oftentimes I would be brought into organizations when they were experiencing some trouble. An example would be, we have a decline in membership and people aren't showing up anymore, or we don't seem to be able to do the work in our strategic plan and it doesn't seem to be working, or no one's communicating. So I would get brought in when coalitions were experiencing a problem. And so I would go through strategic planning process with them in order to figure out what's going on and what can we do about it. And of course, one of the first thing is assessing, like, let's see what's going on and assess what's happening. So a new initiative, a grant or topic is added to your planning table. So you've already been around and you've been doing substance misuse prevention, and now you're going to be expanding and doing problem gambling as well. Or you've been a school-based task force working in the school. There's a new grant and now it needs to be more community-wide. When something is initiating and when you're adding new people to the table, that is a really good time to sort of step back and do strategic planning. And then the other part is when you have a significant change in leadership or membership. So, things happen, people ebb and flow. And I've seen organizations that had a large membership and then over time it got smaller. And what they had to do is figure out, one, what's going on and can we increase our membership? But the other is they had to adjust what they were doing to fit the current membership because they were burning out all their members and more members were leaving, right? Because the structure of what they were trying to do didn't match the amount of people they had. So you would bring in somebody to help troubleshoot sort of what that is all about. So those are some examples of when you can engage in strategic planning. And the strategic planning I'm talking about is, yes, you have the vision and the mission and where are we going. And then part of it too is sort of the how do we enhance and how do we figure out and troubleshoot some area that isn't quite working. What I want to do is open it up to you is, do you use strategic planning? When do you use it? Is my question. Does any of this resonate with you? Am I missing something in reference to this? So I'm going to give you a minute to think about it. All right. I don't have any takers. Well, continue to think about that. And I'm going to go on to the next slide. Okay, so in thinking about this today, one of the things I was thinking about that would be helpful is how you approach the actual process of doing strategic planning, right? I'm going to be doing planning with a group. And how do I go about doing it? And so sometimes you may be the person doing the strategic planning. Sometimes you may bring in somebody from the outside. Let's say, I'm going to assume for this, you're doing the strategic planning. What I'm hoping to do is illustrate some things that I've learned over time that I find really help in the strategic planning process. One of those things is really about, as I said before, part of the strategic planning process is really setting up this group of people to continue to be involved and setting up their interest in the topic, their connection to the topic, and how you're all going to work and meet together. So what I'm hoping to do is sort of highlight some of the things that I have found really work with strategic planning when you're organizing the process. But strategic planning isn't the only time you can use these. So a lot of these techniques I actually use every day in my work. You know, oftentimes I'm in meetings and people start talking and planning, and I find it's a group of people in a room talking, but I don't know where the conversation's going, and I don't understand the decisions we made. And it seemed like it took a long time to get to where we got to. And I think part of it is because somebody did not think through the planning process. And so sometimes I will volunteer to do that. I will say to my boss, hey, I know we're going to be planning this. Do you mind if I think through the planning process? And then I'll create one. And then the planning seems to go much better, because I think oftentimes the thinking through the planning process itself and the techniques that you use, I think we don't learn about that as much. And it's like wearing a pair of glasses. And oftentimes we're in the project management classes. Like, I need to get to point A to point B. I've got to do my action list. I've got to, I need to make sure people are doing X, Y, and Z. And when you're managing the planning process, you're putting on another pair of glasses around really paying attention to the process that you're doing. And so these tips are hopefully will be helpful in this. The other thing is, this is not a science. This is not exact science. A lot of this is learning through doing. I in my career have been able to work with what I call master facilitators who I learned a tremendous amount from. And I think the reason why I learned to do strategic planning is I just ended up doing a lot of it in my job. And I learned a lot. But you all do strategic planning too. So, this is both. I'm both sort of teacher and learner at the same time. And so I really welcome all of you to also share other techniques that you use in reference to this. So we're going to go to the first one. So developing a safe space and all voices heard. So this is something, everybody strives for. The reality, though, is what can happen in strategic planning is if my boss is sitting in the room and she has all the power, and my interest is in making sure I don't say the wrong thing and that I'm going to say the right thing, then I'm not really going to be engaged in the strategic planning, because we have a power differential. If the mayor is sitting in the room and a community resident is in the room, there's a different power dimension. And so I think sometimes putting that on the table, just acknowledging that we're coming from different places, and that in this particular room, we all have a say in what's happening, and we want to all share our opinions, because it's not about one person looking at the information and making decisions. It's about us collectively, that it is the process of collectively looking and sharing our knowledge and our understanding and coming to collective understanding. And so the first thing I find, if I really want a group to feel safe and I really want to make sure all their voices are heard, I've got to acknowledge the elephant in the room. There are different power dimensions. The other part is who's making decisions. And there's something that I call mock empowerment. And I've had it happen. And I've been part of a strategic planning process, and you're working through it. The group makes a decision, and then some group of people that you don't see or know look at that decision and change it. And then they come back and they tell you what the new decision is, but now you're supposed to go and figure out, part two. What I think is that people can be the decision makers, or they can be the informers, right? They can look at the issue and they can make a recommendation, and then maybe another set of people are making the final decision. You have to be really upfront. Am I a decision maker or am I a recommender? Because people will need to know that, right? I'm going to get insulted if I spend all this time and you're not going to take my decision. But if I understand that I'm informing the overall process and my looking and doing this, but there's still going to be somebody who needs to rubber stamp it, then I'll be prepared for that. The other part is ensure members understand expectations. So I don't know about you. I have this with friends too, is sometimes you're talking to a friend and you think that they want you to help solve the problem, and you start making suggestions about what they could do. And truly, they just wanted to vent, right? That was your goal for them. I want to vent. So the same thing is true in groups. Oftentimes when we work in a group, we're not always clear with what we're looking for. So is your expectation that I'm going to, synthesize the information, give you my opinion? Am I just looking at what you did and rubber stamping it? Are only experts going to talk about this? Does my opinion matter as much? So I think we have to be really clear with what our expectations and what we're hoping members will do. Because I know I've been in meetings and I don't speak up because I'm not sure what I'm being asked for. And I don't want to give the wrong thing. So hopefully what you're also taking away from this is when you're thinking about strategic planning, a lot of thought goes in to the people who are engaged in this, right? What's going to make them most comfortable? What's going to make them want to share their opinions and ideas? And how can I make sure I'm setting up the situation that they will be able to share and feel comfortable doing it? The other part, and this is just something I find really interesting, is we all have differences in our thinking and learning styles. And I'm actually going to go to the chat and I'm going to ask you this question. So one of the differences that I call is the difference between planners and doers. Planners like to plan. They like to come up. If you were going to a party, you would want to, or if you were going to have a party, you would want to plan it, right? You would want to figure out the decorations and who's coming and all of that. If you were a doer, you would want to have an action task and you would want to go and do the stuff that has to get done. So my question for you all is, do you identify as a doer or a planner? So take a minute to think of that. Do you like to sort of have the planning process, or do you like to do the action steps and get to action? So do we have doers and do we have planners? So just say doer or planner and we'll see sort of the mix we have. Right in the middle, Yep. All right, we got doers, planners, a little bit of both, which is great. You don't have to be either. All right, that's great. Thank you. So the reason I bring this up is, and this is a personal opinion, so, you know, this isn't written in a book somewhere. The reason I bring this up is oftentimes planning is painful for doers, right? Because planning seems abstract, and planning takes a long time, and planning isn't getting to what we need to do. So when I design and try to make planning processes, it's painful, right? It's painful for doers. I have had colleagues say, I'd rather get a root canal than sit through a planning process. So my goal in planning processes, I want the doers to say, God, that was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. I actually enjoyed that. And there are things that you can do to make it easier for doers. And we're gonna talk about what those things are, so that it's a more enjoyable process. One of the things I do in the beginning of strategic planning is I ask who's a doer and who's a planner, and then we let people own it. And so during the planning process, if doers are getting really anxious and are really hating it, they can voice that. If you plan well, you might not have to do anything. Oh, very nice. I like that. If you plan well, you might not have to do anything. That's great. So another thing I do is I'll like just who's a planner, who's a doer, or what you do is there's like a planning doing continuum, and you have people put a dot on the screen and they say, this is what you get a sense of how many planners versus doers do I have in this planning process. If I've got all doers and very few planners, well, that's going to tell me something about how I need to set this up. If I've got all planners and no doers, that's going to tell me, right? I have a great planning process, but when it comes to action plan and how we go about implementing it. So getting a sense of planners and doers, and this is my personal opinion, I try to plan the process for doers so it's not so excruciating. Good to do both so you know the plans are, yeah, good to do so you know the plans are doable. The other piece is, and this is just, I also think is something to acknowledge and something to be aware of. And again, this all goes to wanting people to participate fully and making them feel safe or comfortable. And the truth is, strategic planning often, where people are popcorning ideas and talking through things, is more palatable to extroverts than it is to introverts. Introverts process internally and they need time to process and think about things, whereas extroverts speak out loud. So in a strategic planning process, it actually is more advantageous for the people who are speaking out loud. So what does that mean? I think it means also that you are thinking about the introverts when you're thinking about your planning process. You know, making sure people have time to read ahead of time, making sure that during the meeting, making sure there is some thinking time for people, or circling back to people who are may just have thought through somebody and you're in a new agenda item, but they want to add something. And slowing down the process and acknowledging the fact that we have people who process internally, and we want to honor that, and we want to recognize the fact that this process doesn't always do that. I find that very helpful. And then ask, like, how can we make this more palatable for you? What would make this better? And I find by acknowledging doing and planning and introvert versus extrovert, it really helps people kind of own like how I can be safe in the room and how I can get through this process with the way in which I approach things. So those are some things in setting up the meeting or setting up the planning process that I do. My question to all of you is, do you want to add anything? Is there anything that all of you do as well? Anything anybody wants to add? All right, I'm going to go on to the next one. So next slide. Interesting point. Introverts, are they more visual? You know, I don't know. I always thought introvert, extrovert, and then if you're visual versus auditory versus kinesthetic are like two separate things. So I don't know if introverts are more visual than extroverts, but I do think the visual piece is really, really huge. Because again, going back to doers, and it's true for planners, but you want to make this process as concrete as possible. And as the participant, I want to know where I'm going. You're taking me on a road somewhere, and I want to know where I'm going, and I want to be able to see it. I want to understand if we're having 5 meetings, what are we doing in each meeting, and what kind of are we trying to get to, and what will that look like? I need to see the road, right? Going into a planning process and having somebody take it step by step without telling me where it's going can be very anxiety provoking. And that's why, now it's not that you can't say, hey, you know, we want to spend a little bit more time, or we're going to take a road off the highway because the group seems to want to talk more about this particular topic. You can do that. But as you go through, making sure that people understand where they are in the planning process and how this is moving things along is really helpful, and making things visual. Because when we're talking, it's very abstract. And the more I can document it, make it visual, have people see the collective conversations that we're having, the more concrete it will feel. I think I've said the provide content. The other thing, and I don't know if this happens to you, but it happens to me sometimes in planning processes, is there isn't enough context laid out for why we're discussing something. Whether it's, I don't have the background, I don't have the knowledge, and so I'm not sure why we're talking about this, or I'm not sure how this thing we're talking about fits with the overall planning process. And so in that case, I'm going to be confused. I'm not going to want to feel foolish. So I'm less likely to say anything. And again, we want everybody to be talking and participating and sharing their opinions and their ideas. So we also want to make sure there's enough context for everybody. And then the last one, which I so believe in, is provide participants the opportunity to see the discussion. Let's see, when that happens for me, I feel bad that I'm slowing the process down for others. I can understand that, but you know what? There's probably somebody else in the room that may actually have the same question you have, because we're polite. I think people are polite by nature. And I don't think that we want to interrupt somebody or slow down the process. This happened recently in an internal email chain where 3 of us didn't understand. We didn't tell the person in the email chain. We asked one of the other people, and they're like, yeah, I'm confused too, because we didn't want to feel foolish, right? And that's a natural inclination, I think, is not wanting to feel foolish. So I think gaining context and asking for context, I think, is really essential. And if you're the person who's designing the process, you're going to want to build it in. You're going to want to think about, how am I making sure that everybody is on the same page with this information? Okay. All right. And somebody said, I think in the very beginning, that planning can be very stressful and very painful. And I think the more organized, the more you're thinking through the planning process, the more you're making it visual, the more people understand where I'm going and what you're expecting for me, the cleaner the process is, right? When people are just sitting in groups of people and we start talking and nothing's written down and people haven't thought about it ahead of time, and then we say, okay, we think these are our conclusions, it feels more abstract. And I'm not sure where it's going to go next. Or if you take planning sort of step by step, then I, as the person, don't know what you're doing with this piece of it and where we're going next. That can be anxiety provoking. So let's see, Claire, telling your colleagues what to do, taking charge is a little uncomfortable. Yeah, yep, yep, that's true. That's very real. So the next slide. So this is a really interesting one. So part of strategic planning, and especially in prevention, is this idea that I'm having this group of people think through whether it's a need or data or a challenge, and I want them to analyze all the information and come up with some conclusions, and I want them to do it collectively. Part of the reason I want them to do it is because truly more minds thinking is better. The other reason is if I really want to buy them into the process and I really want them to own this problem, I have to engage them in the solving of it, right? Them working through these issues is building their ability to be connected to the issue. So one of the things I've observed is sometimes what people will do for efficiency, and I get it, you want to be efficient, we don't have time to do everything, is they will take something from the process and they will figure it out themselves, and then they'll present it back. And oftentimes this is the mission statement, right? I'm going to take the mission, we need to do a mission, and I'm going to work it out, and then we can talk about it. The problem with that is you're missing the group to have an opportunity to define itself. Mission is really who we are, what we are, why we are, where we are. And it's important that the group have a conversation about this. The mission statement itself isn't really the goal. It's the culmination of this group determining who and what it is. And if you take that from them, then they're not thinking it through, and you may miss some issues that come up later. I one time did a mission statement with a group that was just forming, and through that process, they realized they were two different groups, that there was enough difference. There was one group that wanted to do one thing, one group that wanted to do another, and they realized that they were really two, and they separated and they became two different groups. If somebody had just come to the table with a mission statement, I don't think that understanding of who and what we are and what we're doing would have happened across the group members. So when there's an opportunity to have group members think something through, even though it may not seem efficient, definitely allow them to do that if you can. Okay. Yeah, and one of the things in mission statements is breaking the members into small groups and having each group think about who, what, why, where, and when, and then having a conversation. So who do you think we are? What do you think we are? Why do we think you are? And, you know, if you have a substance misuse coalition, that might not be a big deal. But let's say you're combining some primary prevention grants with some more harm reduction grants, and you're going to be covering all of that information. The who, what, why, where is going to be really important, because who you're serving is going to change, and why people are motivated may be the same, but might be slightly different. And so you want to think those things through and have those discussions. All right, I'm going to take a break for a minute and see if anybody, I think a draft of a mission statement should start the conversation. You can do it that way. You can definitely do it that way. It is more efficient. You know, it's I find that having people think through the components of a mission statement collectively, and thinking that through has the group think itself through more. But again, this is the thing, when you are the person who's organizing the process, you can do what works for the group. And again, that's another consideration, is showing the mission statement. You may have a group that doesn't like to process very much, and that's the way they want to do it. And that's true too. Other comments or questions? All right. Okay. All right, so next slide. So here's parking lots. So I was going to change the slide of this, which is, you know, parking lots are more than just putting information aside when it comes up, right? They're a great tool. And there's a couple of times that I find parking lots really help get the process unstuck. One of the things that sometimes happens is a group will reach a point and that are in an impasse, and it will be, is it going to be A or is it going to be B? And the group can't make that decision, right? What I often do is say, you know what, let's take that decision making, put it in the parking lot and get back to it, because we're not able to figure this out yet. And it may be that we don't have enough information and we haven't worked through enough details. That will unstick the process normally. And normally it has to be something that I can then move on from. Then we continue in the planning process. And 9 times out of 10, by the time we go back to that decision in the parking lot, it's obvious what it should be. Without doing that, what can happen is if too much discussion and too much stuckness goes on, people can get really frustrated in the process. Like, oh, we can never get anything done. And it can be frustrating. And trying to move people to it's neither A or B, it could be A and B. Let's see, parking lots are good so you not get, yeah, so you're not caught in the process. The other time I find parking lots really helpful is sometimes you've got participants and they're bringing up things that either are inappropriate or are derailing the process or, you know, are just getting in the way. And I don't know why this is, what I have found is when somebody sees their information in a parking lot, they stop. It's like, it's official, it's written down. So oftentimes I will use a parking lot to sort of help manage some of the disrupting that can happen or moving off the topic in order to sort of be able to move on, but still being really polite to that particular person. So those are two pieces that I have found in what can happen in planning that are really helpful. Let's see, next one. So this is another technique. So, and this really helps with politics too. So when it comes to making a decision and people making a decision, sometimes you have different levels of decision maker in the room. You may have politics involved, but you really want to have an honest decision where everybody has an equal voice. One of the things that I have found that really works well is if you develop a set of criteria for making the decision. So is it feasible? Is it cost effective? Is it high importance? When you're actually making the decision, by the time you get to the answer, it's very objective. It fit the criteria. So the person trying to influence the process through politics or through sheer willpower or the fact that they have a very big personality isn't able to do it because it's moved from subjective, you think we should do A and I think we should do B, to, oh, we all agree that this is how we're making a decision, and then it becomes an objective decision. And I have used this a lot to really get in situations that have been very political or everybody didn't seem to have the same level of voice, and it seemed like decisions were being made based on sort of people's personalities, or power. And so I find this really effective to make sure everybody has a voice and to keep the process objective. All right. Next slide. So this is really big. And so thinking through, when I say thinking through the planning process, it's really thinking through, if I want people to identify the priorities or talk about the priorities. So we're talking about substance misuse, and I want them to talk about the substance related priorities, let's say, right? And we're going to discuss that. For me to think it through ahead of time and to figure out how I'm going to visually represent it is incredibly helpful for making it concrete. So in this case, I would discuss priority A and answer all those questions and write it down, right? You can do it. There's lots of really great kind of tools now. There's something called Padlet where you can literally create sort of questions and then people can fill in the information while you're filling in the information. And then you go to B and then you go to C and you can take a look at it, right? The thing that's important here is documenting the process, allowing people to see what is being said. So I'm not just having to keep it in my mind, I can see it. It also allows me to look at the information in an easily understood form so we can discuss it. So we're all looking at the same thing at the same time. So, and this is the piece I find at work too sometimes, is people will be talking about something in planning and no one would have thought this through. And so conversations just go round and round and round. When if somebody had thought through, like, okay, how are we going to get to that particular decision? What do we need to look at, and what's the process, and how do we just sort of, like, it could be a flip chart paper, how do we visualize it? It works a lot better. And I feel like a lot of my job is figuring out, how can I visualize the conversation, help document it so everybody can see the results simultaneously. Hello? Everything okay?
I think somebody just unmuted themselves by accident, Carol.
Oh, okay.
I think you're muted.
Question.
Yes.
You said that tool was called Tablet.
Oh, Padlet. It's Padlet.
Got you. Thank you.
.com. And I have to tell you, I am obsessed with it. I've been using it for a lot of my strategic planning, and it works amazingly well. Like, you could create something like this. So the next piece is, so I figured out this part of the process, right? So the next piece is, I then want to take the information and I want them to compare and contrast it. I need to reorganize it so that they can see it in a format where they can easily compare and contrast. So the other part in planning that I find is you are constantly reorganizing the information in ways that the group can see and then analyze. And I think that's a real key to keeping the process moving, to keeping it from being less frustrated, because I know every time I come, you're going to have the information in a way that I can see it. And then that's going to help me answer the questions that we're doing. And so the other part of this is, you want to think through the sequencing, and you also want to be thinking about, how am I going to take the information I had the last time, and how am I now going to organize it this time in order for people to be able to look at it and come to conclusions. Next slide. Yeah, so this is just some tips. So these are some things that you think about. So what is the group going to be doing? Are they going to be reviewing? Are they going to be brainstorming? Are they going to be discussing? Are they going to be selecting? Like, I'm having them talk about priorities. What am I wanting them to do with it? And then the question is, how do I provide structure to the conversation? Am I going to have questions for them to consider? Am I going to have a set of criteria? Am I going to have some way for them to visually see, you know, the different parts of this conversation and to put their ideas in? So what's the structure, the visual structure that I'm actually going to give to this conversation, so that as we're discussing it, people can see, and then the information is organized in such a way that they then can come to conclusions with it. Once I know that, what are we going to do with the information that's generated? So are we going to make a decision with it? Are we going to develop an action plan? Are we going to prioritize? And that then leads you to your next planning activity, right? So we looked at all this information. Now we want to prioritize. Well, I'm going to need to reorganize the information in a different way. And I'm going to have to think through some additional planning pieces for the next piece. So I go back, you know, what is the group going to be doing now in this next step? And so these are really what I find the questions that I ask myself when I'm trying to really figure out, how do I create a visual around the conversation, and how do I structure it so that it can end up with information that people can then look at and analyze, rather than we have a whole bunch of ideas out there, but I don't know how they go together, and I don't know how they fit together. And as I'm watching, it's not connected enough for me to be able to analyze it. I hope that makes sense. Next slide. Oh, there we go.
That's great. Thanks so much, Carol. I always learn so much from listening to you. And now we're going to just shift gears a bit and have more of a conversation. So thanks for stopping our screen share Clara, and we're going to just walk through a few interview questions we thought might be interesting to explore. Some of these came directly from the registration questions that different people asked as they registered for today's session. And I just have to say, I don't think we could have invited a better expert to talk about strategic planning today than you, Carol, because you've led more groups and organizations through planning processes than just about anyone I've ever known. So I wondered if you could start by telling us about the types of organizations that you've worked with on strategic planning.
Sure. So I think I ended up doing strategic planning because I came into the prevention field in the 90s when it was switching from school-based prevention to community prevention. And all of a sudden, everybody was having community coalitions, but no one had had them before. And so it was like, how do we create? And what is this? And so I learned a lot about strategic planning as the field learned to do community-based prevention is what I would say. And over the time, I was able to really work with some people who are really experts. So I have worked with statewide organizations like the Nutrition Association. I've worked with nonprofits like Elders. I've worked with state departments of public health. One of my favorites is I worked with a group of artists who were trying to figure out who and what they were. And it was one of the most fascinating things because they didn't want any structure because they were artists, but they had to be organized. So I've been really fortunate, and I've worked with really mostly on the I've never worked with for-profit businesses, so mainly nonprofits and state and local government and coalitions.
That's great. So lots of different organization types and areas of focus. So one question we have is, you talked a lot about what strategic planning is, and we're wondering if you could say a little bit about what strategic planning is not from your perspective.
Great. It's a great question. So I'm going to give you my answer, which is my answer. So somebody else might answer it very differently. But I think the piece about strategic planning is this collective group of people who are looking at and analyzing information and coming to conclusions. So when you have somebody and they come up with information and then they want the group to respond to it or rubber stamp it, this is what I'm doing. So, and you have the group basically asking a couple of questions and then it gets rubber stamped. That's not really strategic planning, right? The part about strategic planning is this collective group of people who are looking and analyzing things. And so that to me is the hallmark of it. And if that's not happening, then for me, it's not really strategic planning.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. And that actually really nicely dovetails with my next question, which is, you mentioned in the steps, the planning steps that you shared earlier in the presentation, that the first step of this kind of strategic planning process is to collect that information to guide all these efforts. So out of curiosity, how would a group figure out the kind of information they need to collect or access if they didn't know what they didn't know? So they don't really know where to begin. How do they figure out the information that they need?
I think that's a great question. So I think one of the pieces is, if you don't know what you don't know, then I would say you start by finding out who's an expert or who has knowledge in this area. And if it was substance misuse related, which wouldn't be applicable to everybody here because you all do substance misuse, but let's say, I'm the police chief and I'm seeing what I'm seeing, and I get a group of stakeholders together and we're looking at, what are we going to do about this, but we really don't know. Then I would find out, who knows, and, they're training in TA centers. So I think I would start by finding out where are some resources and who are some people I can talk to, and can they come and talk to us and give us some information. Oftentimes, I think groups working through and learning about the issue is a really great start in building a group anyway, right? Yes. Like, so are we all on the same page? Or, I know nothing about this. I'm a parent and you've been doing this work for 15 years. Like, we're sitting at the table talking about this, but I don't have the same knowledge you have. So part of it is making sure that I have the information and that I understand. So I think groups taking time to do some of that, building information and gaining information themselves is a really helpful step.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And so I'm going to open up for questions from the audience. And again, we welcome anyone on the line here to share any questions or comments you may have. We also invited folks to share questions during registration. We got some really excellent submissions through that process. So we're going to get to as many of them as we can today, and as many that we receive here today in real time. But if you submitted a question either here or before and we don't get to it today, please don't worry. We do have your name and your emails from registration, so we will be able to follow up with you. And so I just see one coming in the chat right now from S. Gray. So Carol, are SWOT analyses useful in this process? And if so, where would that fall?
Oh yeah, SWOT analyses are great. So SWOT are strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So sometimes when you're doing planning, so let's say you're an existing organization and you're doing a checkup on yourself about kind of where are we and where are we on our goals. Looking at here are our strengths, here are our weaknesses, here's kind of the outside and environment. So you're kind of looking internally. So that's strengths and weaknesses, and then you're looking externally. And so it's very helpful to give you information about what's working, what's not, and what do we need to pay attention to in the outside world. And then you'd look at that information and you'd say, so how do we want to use that, right? You know, we have weaknesses in these areas. Maybe we want to take some time and look deeper. I worked with a group once, and the real problem was they only met as a large coalition once a year, and they were having a lot of symptoms. And when they figured it out, all they needed to do was build in more meetings, and it really took care of the problem. So, you know, you can focus on one of those challenges, and then opportunities. You may want to see, can you take what you're doing and can you take advantage of the opportunity? So the SWOT is really about an existing organization looking at the work you've done to date.
That's great. Oh, go ahead.
Can I ask a follow-up? So how does that work into strategic planning? Like, is it just something you apply when you hit a bump, or?
Well, so let's say, I mean, let's say you, in the beginning, you could use it, but you don't have any strengths and weaknesses because you're brand new, you know, but you could look at threats and opportunities. And so in strategic planning, let's say I've done strategic planning and now I'm in year 2 and I want to do a check-in and I want to see how we're doing with the strategic plan, right? Because it's not static. And so I might do that exercise to get a sense of what's working and what's not working. And both, there's the plan and then there's the car. It's driving the plan. And those are both, and sometimes we're really thinking of the plan, but what's happening is the car's breaking down. So the plan isn't moving forward because my car's broken down and I need to pay attention to my car. And I think in strategic planning and implementing strategic planning, you're paying attention to the plan, but you're paying attention to the car. So I would say it's either a continuation of strategic planning that you're doing in a check-in, or it's what I call like an annual checkup. So yeah, so that's how it kind of fits into strategic planning. It can fit into, let's say somebody hasn't done strategic planning for 5 years, and I'm going to do a new strategic planning and I'm an existing organization, then I would fit it in there.
Got it. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you. And Carol, would it be fair to say that as part of that information gathering, you know, maybe going through and having that kind of SWOT or SCOT analysis could be part of some of that, thinking about information like what you have and what you don't have?
Exactly.
So here's an interesting question from a registrant. So how would you advise engaging coalition members to sign up for tasks? And this person shares that sometimes members have lots of ideas, but then it's a challenge finding people to do the actual work.
Yeah, I mean, if I would be a very wealthy woman if I could figure out how to make that always work, because that is real and that is hard. What I will say, there is a technique that I've used in planning that can help with that, which is when you're prioritizing, So let's say you're prioritizing a bunch of strategies and you're saying, we have these criteria. After you do that, there's another set of criteria I put up, which is what you're interested in, what you will actually work on. And 9 times out of 10, the top 2 things that everybody thinks is a need, no one wants to work on. And so what you're doing is you're aligning the group's interest and what they'll sign up for with what you're doing. Now, you still, if it's a grant, you still have to figure out how am I going to do these other pieces, but you'll get more likelihood of having people sign up if, when you're selecting things, you're able to select things that line up a little bit, because I think that happens a lot. That's one particular piece. And then the other piece too, as a solution to that too, is I think sometimes when we think of coalitions, we think it's everybody around the table at the same time, which makes sense. But there are some times where you may have particular tasks or thing you need done, like having somebody help create an event or staff an event, that you may have people on the outside that are interested in the topic, but I don't want to sit at your table, but I'm happy to help you in an event. So in my town, we have a historical society or something, and I don't want to be involved in the planning, but I love helping to sit in the houses as they do the historical tours, because I just find that really interesting. So I'll sign up for that, but I don't want to go to any meetings and talk about it. I just want to sign up. So I think the other thing, when you're having trouble with certain tasks, another thing to think about is there any way of else getting this particular piece done? And then the last piece with that is, it also depends on where you are in the development of your coalition. So new coalitions go through, staff have all power and responsibility. They set the agenda, they're moving the process forward. And sometimes, and oftentimes over time, the coalition itself is building more power and taking over more ownership. If you're in the beginning of that process, it's going to be much harder to get people to sign up than it will be down the line when their buy-in is much greater. So the other thing I would ask myself is kind of, where am I? And if I'm an existing coalition and this has been going on for a while, I think that the other thing you can do is bring it up to the group. Like, the group gets to help, they own the coalition, they get to help solve the problem is another thing that I would bring up to the group. We have this stuff, people don't seem to be signing up. So like, what are some solutions to this? So there's a couple of ideas.
I love those ideas. And thank you so much for them, Carol, and for being part of the interview. If you're on the line and you submitted a question we didn't get to, please don't worry, we will absolutely follow up with you. But now, since we're kind of coming to the end of our time together, I'm going to turn this over to Claire to help wrap us up.
Thanks, Jess. And thank you so much, Carol. I learned so much. I've even been in on the planning of this and I still learn more. So thank you very much. It was great. I hope that everybody here on the line with us learned a lot and had information here that made this time worthwhile for them. What you're seeing right now is the evaluation slide that I showed you at the beginning, that QR code, and will bring you to the same place as the URL will bring you. Just 2 different ways of doing the same thing. It'll take you about 5 to 8 minutes, and we're really interested in your feedback. And after the conclusion of the session, in the next 3 to 5 business days, you'll receive your certificates of attendance, and we will also provide you with some links where we've posted the material from the session, the slides, a list of resources that are related, and the recording will be available. So I'll send that out via email. Well, usually takes about a week. So thank you again for being here. We're going to leave the room open for a couple of moments. And Kylie, I'll be in touch with you on that. Yes, I can do that. And we're gonna leave the room open for you to be able to do the evaluation. And when I send out the information from this session, I'll also send out information regarding next week's session. We have one more event in this sequence, and next week's will be on logic modeling. So, and it'll be similar in format. If you've already signed up, if you haven't signed up, There'll be a place for you to ask questions. We will endeavor to answer those during the course of the session. If we don't, we'll get back to you. And we will do some groundwork and then move into conversational stuff that will be about the questions that folks have given to us over time. So I'll send you information on how to sign up for that session as well if you are interested. Yes, and thank you. Thanks, Bess. And again, thank you everyone for being here. And we'll leave the room open for just another moment. And thanks for feedback ahead of time. Oh, and happy St. Patrick's Day. So we started. It's a good place to start, good place to end.